Hey guys, it's Sasha. In 2007, the UK economy was the 5th largest in the world. UK GDP was about 21% of the size of the United States, but the UK is a small country, and back in 2007, the UK had a higher GDP per capita than the United States. The average weekly wage in the United States back in 2007 was $700, and in the UK, it was £426, which was around $860 at the time, so salaries in the UK were 23% higher than they were in the United States. Fast forward to 2024, and the average salary in the United States has gone up by 66% to $1,165. UK salaries have increased in pounds to £693 a week, but because the pound has lost so much value since 2007, the average salary in the UK today has gone up less than 5% in 17 years to $900. Adjusting for inflation, salaries in the UK today are much lower than they were 17 years ago. At the same time, the UK economy has fallen from 5th to 6th largest in the world after being overtaken by India. UK's economy has gone from being 21% the size of the United States to just 12%, an almost 50% drop, relatively speaking. Economic growth in the UK has been slower than in the United States, in the European Union, and even in other countries that have also recently seen a decline, such as Germany. In the last 5 years, the UK economy has basically not grown at all, while the US economy has been booming. So what is going wrong with the UK economy, and why does it seem to only be getting worse? The Institute of Fiscal Studies published a paper called "A Decade and a Half of Historically Poor Growth Has Taken Its Toll." And one big takeaway from this analysis is much of that slowdown is a result of international factors well outside the control of any government. The fallout from the financial crisis, COVID, the energy price spike, because according to the Institute of Studies or whatever, no other countries in the world had the same challenges. You see, the United States, of course, completely avoided the 2008 financial crisis that, originated in the United States. And as we all know, the rest of the world was completely unaffected while the UK was suffering from COVID alone. And Europe, which was far more dependent on Russia for its energy, was not impacted by the energy crisis at all, like the UK was. Looking back at the stock market, UK companies managed to grow their earnings by an average of 3.8% in the 17 years since 2007. In the US, corporate profits grew by 6% in the same time period, and that rate of growth has increased in the last few years. One massive difference between the US stock market and the UK stock market is the type of companies that you find listed there. The biggest companies listed in the UK are energy companies like Shell, BP, and National Grid, big banks like HSBC, Barclays, and Lloyds, insurance companies, some big mining companies. In the United States, the big companies that are posting huge profits and driving the entire stock market are tech companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. In fact, the UK's biggest companies today look a lot like the United States did back in 2007. Back then, energy companies, banks, and stuff like that dominated the S&P 500 as well. And the problem with big banks and energy is that these are stagnant businesses. These are old businesses. Your growth is limited by the number of people and the economy around you. You can't just go and grow by 1,000% in a few years if you're a bank, unlike a tech company. And part of the problem is the fact that the UK capital markets are relatively slow and illiquid. Raising capital in the UK is more difficult whether you are a startup or a public company listed on a stock exchange than it is in the US. In recent years, startups in the United States have managed to attract about 20 times as much financing as in the UK from venture capital. Many global companies choose to list on US stock exchanges instead of their home markets because of the significantly better access to capital. Even the biggest, most successful UK companies are now choosing to list in the US. ARM, the computer chip company from the UK, recently listed on the Nasdaq, and Revolut, the London-based fintech, is reportedly also planning to list in the United States. If you look on the surface, many of the costs and processes of running a company are actually relatively similar between the UK and the United States. When you add up all of the taxes, the cost of employing staff is very similar in terms of tax. In the UK, the employee pays a bit more tax than the employees do in the United States, but the employer in the UK pays a bit less, and in the US they pay a bit more, and that roughly evens out in terms of total cost to the business. Salaries in the United States are higher, so the cost of hiring staff overall is higher as well. The regulatory environment in the US and in the UK is similar. Tax benefits to startup founders are similar, and taxes on capital gains are about the same. Over the last 2 decades, corporation tax in the UK has actually been generally lower than in the US, except the very recent increase from 19% up to 25%. So the reason that the US economy has massively outperformed the UK is not based on the fact that, well, it's cheaper to do business or something like that. Energy is more expensive in the UK. There are a few other factors, but the primary reasons are cultural and the snowball effect. All of the leaders in tech and the smartest computer scientists, the best people in that entire industry, are already in the United States. The ones that are not in the United States are planning and figuring out how they're going to get to the United States. If those people go and start up new companies, those companies are also going to be based in the United States. The founders and employees of PayPal are one really famous example of how these companies go and multiply into massive positive effects for the economy. They are often known as the PayPal Mafia, because since PayPal, Elon Musk founded Tesla and SpaceX. He used to be at PayPal. Peter Thiel founded Palantir. Max Levchin founded the finance company Affirm. 3 of the ex-PayPal employees went on to create YouTube. And Reid Hoffman founded LinkedIn. Once you have the melting pot with the right people in the right place, with the right level of access to investor capital, success tends to breed more success. The US made starting a new startup relatively easy, with regulations stretching all the way back to the reduction of capital gains tax in the Revenue Act of 1921. And the US also has very fluid employment laws. Now, in the UK, we like having protection. People really appreciate having protection. Getting rid of a non-performing employee or one that you don't need in your company can be very complex, can take a very long time, and be a very expensive exercise. You might get hit with lawsuits for things like unfair dismissal. You have to pay high severance. In the US, employees are considered to be at will by default, which means that they can be fired at any time without cause. And in September this year, just a few weeks ago, a new rule banning non-compete clauses has been implemented by the Federal Trade Commission in the US. This means there is nothing stopping an employee quitting and moving to a competitor or starting their own competing business. Employee rights and protective legislation sounds great to employees because it gives you certainty, gives you reassurance, it stops companies being agile, being able to hire and fire people as and when they want. You have rights. But in the long term, it's a massive problem. It's like shooting yourself in the foot, because it means that those companies that employ the employees are hamstrung by the restrictions. They're a lot more careful and a lot less likely to hire people because they're going to think twice about the implications of what happens if they have to get rid of those people. They are hamstrung by the restrictions on employees that celebrate these extra protections, employees that are very difficult to get rid of. And those employees end up earning much lower salaries compared to working in the same type of job in the United States. The problem for the UK is that the economy is stale. It is stagnant. It is going nowhere. Old school banks, tobacco companies, insurance companies, mining companies, they are not the answer. They are not going to magically kickstart the UK economy that is flatlining. And to entice companies to start in the UK, it is not good enough to be roughly the same as the US on things like taxes. Nobody is going to switch to something that is roughly the same as what you've already got, as where you already are. So we have a new Labour government in the UK after a long stretch of having the Conservatives. And the Labour government that we now have won a huge majority in the recent election. And a few days ago, Rachel Reeves, the new UK Chancellor, delivered her first budget. How do you think is the UK going to get the economy going again? Well, the new Labour government has decided that the answer is to increase taxes by £40 billion. The idea is that the UK economy will be the first example ever in history where the economy starts growing because of increasing taxes. Employers' national insurance has gone up massively in the UK. This is the social security tax that UK companies have to pay on top of the salary that they already pay their employees. This tax just increased from 13.8% to 15%, but more importantly, the starting point at which you have to pay it has gone down from £9,100 to £5,000. So now companies in the UK have to pay a lot more tax just to employ people. Income tax and national insurance tax brackets are now frozen until not next year, not the year after, until 2029. And that is also an effective tax increase on people because wages go up on average every year alongside inflation. So if the tax brackets stay flat as the wages increase, more and more people are going to be taxed in the higher tax brackets. In the US, the tax brackets get revised annually by the IRS, but in the UK, employees just keep having to pay more tax every year as a result. Then Rachel Reeves increased capital gains tax. The lower tier has gone up from 10% to 18%, and the higher rate has gone from 20 to 24%. So for those who own shares, in most cases in companies, the tax has just increased from 20 to 24%. Thresholds and stamp duty, the tax you pay when you buy a house, those are also going down. So if you want to move in the UK and you want to buy a house, well, that's going to be a heck of a lot more expensive for you. So if there's a new job somewhere, you might not consider taking it because it's going to cost you that much more to move. If you want to move to a different part of the UK, it is going to be a bit of a problem. If you want to move to the UK, it's also going to be a problem. I guess you might be able to tell that Rachel Reeves has never actually worked in a non-banking job. And according to reports, she lied about working as an economist at the Bank of England while actually doing an admin role. If you are an entrepreneur and you're looking to start or grow your business, there is nothing at all in this budget that would make you choose the UK as the location for this business, that would make you choose to stay in the UK if you have other options that you are considering. Nothing. During a time when tech startups are the driving forces of economic growth, the UK is doing absolutely fuck all to try and get tech startups to flourish in the UK. The UK government does not get it. During COVID, the UK government rushed in to lower business rates relief for retail and hospitality businesses. If you are a shop or a restaurant, you got a lot of help with your business rates because, businesses were having to shut down. But if you were not a shop or restaurant, if you were a small business that, works in tech, for example, or, pretty much anything else at all, you got told to go and fuck yourself. As a result, many of these businesses have suffered, many of them have gone under, and the UK economy has flatlined in the last 5 years while the US economy is exploding. When COVID hit, you were not allowed to travel to the office. You lost all of your revenue, even if you were not a hotel or a restaurant. You were forced to take out huge loans to keep your business afloat, but you still had to pay business rates every month for the office that you were not allowed to go to. And it is this type of punitive approach that applies absolutely across the board, that prevents genuine startups from making it in the UK. I am renting a barn on a cow farm for my office. This studio here is an old shack on a cow farm in the middle of absolutely nowhere, down a small narrow path. I work here alone mostly. Sometimes my wife joins me. It's big because it's an old farm building that were built big, but it was derelict before I did a deal with a farmer and rented it. So for the privilege of trying to run a small business on a cow farm in the middle of fucking nowhere, I have to pay the local council £1,200 every month in business rates. That's about $1,500. That's just the business rates. I also have to pay rent and all the bills on top of that. How exactly is a normal, average, relatively small rural startup meant to succeed when the UK government and the local councils just want to rob you with taxes at every junction? The new UK government is exactly as useless as the previous one. Everyone in that government is either an ex-banker, an ex-lawyer, or a career politician, just exactly the same as it was before. And none of them have ever worked in a proper, regular, normal job, and none of them have any idea on how to get the economy going. We've already seen the example in the budget, and we see this yo-yo effect. happening with policies over and over and over. First, corporation tax goes down, then it goes back up. National insurance goes down, then it goes back up. Income tax brackets go up, and then they get frozen. So in reality, they're going down. There is absolutely zero coherence, zero consistency. There is no plan. And you know the reason why there is no plan? Because they don't have any idea what it is that they need to do. The UK economy is dying, and the UK government is feeding it little bits of paracetamol instead of administering CPR. The government was quick to dish out the government-backed loans to companies during the pandemic. But go and try to get regular, normal, everyday business financing in the UK as a startup without having connections and without a rich daddy who knows the right people in the right places. It's impossible. There are a few networks in London, mostly people who already know each other or people who are already in the right wealthy circles. But if you're a regular sort of person who wants to go start a business, good fucking luck getting any kind of funding for it. You will not get it. You are on your own. Good luck getting any local authority to give you any kind of support. The moment that you get a small office in a shack in the middle of nowhere, they will start sending you angry letters or big red writing saying that you owe them boatloads of money. And hey, if you're in the UK government and you have shit for brains and you're watching this, I'm going to give you some free tips because I know that you just can't figure it out by yourself. I came up with this in about 10 minutes this morning. If I have a bit more time, I can give you some more tips. Give me a ring. Make sure you get out a pen and paper so that you can write this down. First, go and set up enterprise zones centered around universities in the UK. Make as many zones as you want and dedicate specific areas in the country where businesses can set up. These need to be real enterprise zones, not the ones that currently exist where you have to have an office in a specific building on a specific business park because the owner of that building is mates with whoever created that pathetic scheme. It has to be open to everybody in a broad area. Any startup or small company coming to these enterprise areas can get a big tax break on employing students from those universities part-time while they study and full-time after they graduate. Make this work part of the curriculum. Get the brightest and best talent in the country interested, actively wanting to work for the next tech startup instead of becoming a lawyer or working for Goldman Sachs. Then get those startups breaks from local taxes. Many farms, old mills, old factory buildings are sitting derelict, disused since the UK stopped being an industrial country. Why not encourage people to use these spaces for a new wave of business instead of punishing them for trying to do so? Then introduce a new corporation tax offset plan. If the company is set up in the UK and pays other UK taxes, things like income tax, national insurance, local property taxes, VAT, etc., allow companies inside these new enterprise zones to offset their corporation tax by tax that is already paid elsewhere. This encourages companies to hire people in the UK. It encourages setting up shop in the UK because employment taxes can be offset. It encourages companies to set up offices in these enterprise zones instead of farming out jobs to India and China. And it encourages companies to invest in growth because when they begin posting profits, they get a favorable tax treatment. Then go and pass legislation which encourages private financing to be relatively easily available to startups. Maybe that means creating a public investment bank. The UK is the only major economy in the world that doesn't have one. Maybe provide government guarantees for small businesses borrowing from banks, financial services companies, so that getting a loan from a bank for a new business is not more difficult than finding rocking horse poop. At the moment, starting a startup in the UK is mostly reserved for people who have already earned money after, slaving away in the city for 20 years, or young people from very rich families where daddy can pay for all the fees and startup costs and fund you forever and ever. There is no culture of doing something new, of starting something in your garage. There is no culture of taking risks, of doing something different. And you know what? It's not encouraged in any way whatsoever. In fact, you are told that you should not be taking these risks. Everyone who goes to a top university in the UK goes to work for a Deutsche Bank, a Deloitte, or goes to do a law conversion course. Literally everyone. And that is because there is no encouragement and no support for doing something different, doing something that might actually start growing the economy. You take on all the risk, and while you're taking all the risk, make sure you go and pay a fuckload of tax, and then maybe you'll fail in the process because you've had to pay too much tax. Until the UK government realizes that you can't tax your way out of a deep hole, the situation is only going to get worse. But instead, this government is going to spend billions and billions of pounds passing new laws protecting workers' rights and whatever else that they're busy doing. And they will keep increasing taxes because they need to pay for the increases in spending, while the economy continues suffering and going precisely nowhere.